You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast and check us out online at beardedtheologians.com. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
This week on the podcast, we were kind of looking around and kicking back some ideas. And so this week we dug back into the lectionary again. And there was a certain line in 2 Corinthians this week that touched us. It's 2 Corinthians 5:7. We live by faith and not by sight. And so, Zach, as you think about those words attributed to Paul, what are some things that kind of come to mind to you?
Well, it's interesting because we spend a lot of time on asking the question, where do you see God at work? And trying to find these really tangible ways to find God in our world. And yet Paul's encouraging us here to live by faith, not by sight, not by the things we can see and touch, but by the faith, knowing that, man, God's there, God's at work. And yet we live in this really tangible society that we want to see results. We want to see in touch and feel and smell and taste, all of these things, right? And so this idea to go back and say, this is faith is this. It's believing, it's acting, it's seeing by faith, not by what we can physically touch and see and all of those things. And yet it's a really hard thing to do. That's a really hard concept because that's not the culture and society we live in. It's a very tangible one. Even with relationships and things like that, we want to be able to at least be able to see someone, or sit down in front of them and have a cup of coffee. Even texting is more tangible than just knowing we have somebody out there, right? And so it places a really interesting conversation before us on what does faith look like in a world that wants to touch and see and feel?
Well, especially when we start talking about you looking as the world as it's moving more towards the VR, mm-hmm. the virtual reality stuff, and mm-hmm. what does faith look like in that situation? And I don't know. I prefer the tangible.
Sure.
But I do understand that sometimes, like, within, especially you look at our relationship, we see each other maybe once or twice a year, but yet we talk to each other almost pretty much religiously every day. Mm-hmm. And I think that those things, when we think about faith, the big struggle is like, I think we have to be careful talking about, we live by faith and not by sight. And it's not by, notice it doesn't say experience.
Right.
And I think that far too often, some of the reasons why people leave the church is because they felt like, I didn't get anything out of worship. I didn't feel anything out of worship, when it could be, the scripture reading or the liturgy or the music, man, could have been like the best it had been all year. And mm-hmm. they could be like, just didn't have anything in it for me.
Right.
And I think that that's some of the struggle that we face as pastors is that you have people like, when they come to church, some will have that mentality. Like, I just didn't feel it today. I didn't, mm-hmm. And is that God abandoning me? Or, and I think that the bigger thing is trying to broaden our horizon on what God, the experience of God really is bigger than what we want. And right. that God will provide, is God's always continually providing opportunities for us to acknowledge him and see God's presence. But it's that reality of seeing what is not there. And I always think of the Indiana Jones, when he takes that first step and when he's looking for the chalice and he like takes that, like, if you watch him take that first step, I mean, it's a real hesitant first step. And he like takes like the biggest, he almost like brings his leg up over mm-hmm. his head before he like sets down. And to me, that's what faith is. It's taking that step, realizing that there's going to be some vulnerability, there's going to be some mm-hmm. cost, but being that urge, that movement forward to take that step and to live by faith means that you're willing to do that, not knowing what the outcome is, not knowing whether or not you'll succeed or fail, mm-hmm. but with the hope of experiencing God. And I think that, if we take more attempts at opening ourselves up on how we can experience God, I bet we would open ourselves up and say, wow, I didn't, I didn't realize that praying the Lord's Prayer corporately is just a holy and sacred thing, because I just kind of went through the motions. But the time that I stopped and faithfully prayed it, it's amazing to see the impact that made on me. And I think that that's something we can think about, especially in this day and age of having to be tangible. But how can we live out our faith in this world today? It's, I mean, it's never been easy, but I think that it's taking that first step and opening ourselves up and being willing to experience something that we just will never fully understand.
Well, and I think that's right, because you're right. Experience is it's a dangerous thing, because it's either we had a good experience or we had a bad experience, and like you said, so many people are like, well, there wasn't anything in it for me, or I had a bad experience, or this is in answering that question of why don't we go to church, just in general, it usually comes down to I had a bad experience. But also this experience in faith, what we find ourselves doing, like you said, is we limit ourselves to that experience. It has to be this, or this, right? I experience, I always hear people, I experience God through camp, or I experience God through praying, or I experience God through music, or, whatever. And it's very singular. And when it comes back to that question of, well, where do you, I went to worship today, but I didn't feel God present. Well, you're not allowing yourself to be fully present. I think that's my opinion, is we're not allowing ourselves to be fully present in those moments and experience God in a little bit different way, that maybe, for a season, prayer speaks to us. And when that season runs its course, music or worship or the sermon or being a mission or whatever it is begins to speak to us in a different way that begins to fill us up, and that experience begins to change. Or then in the church, we go, well, this is how I experience God, so this is how you have to experience God. And people are going, it's not me. And so we take the faith element out of it and just insert experience, my experience. In because I experience God this way, you have to experience God that way. And because I'm not experienced God in this way, there's no way you could be, right? And we take that whole faith element out of it to have those tangible experiences, those tangible moments that we can physically hand someone, which is that's not it. That's not where faith is. That's not what church is. That's not where worship is. Faith is being able to walk in the door wherever that may be and go, here I am. I'm ready. I'm open. I'm going to be intentional about finding where God's speaking to me today. And that may be different tomorrow. In not being so focused on how do I grab onto God today, but just being the willingness to go, here I am.
And that would be like just not only seeking that trying to grab onto God, but allowing God to grab you. And I think that far too often, and I think that's at camp. At camp, we open ourselves up. Camp, mission trip, Emmaus.
Right. Because we're supposed to, right? That's the intention.
Like we can let our hair down. We can truly be vulnerable. And the moment that we allow that vulnerability in, that's, the Spirit's always at work. I mean, I believe that God's always at work, but that moment that we allow that to come in, we feel that experience. And then like, we want to take that to Sunday morning, but we don't. One of the things that we do on our Sunday morning service, and I notice a difference when we do it and when we don't do it, is that when we process in, Chin and I go to each rail and we pray. And I notice that the Sundays we're not allowed to do that because it's bell choir or whatever we've got going on. The service to me feels a little bit different, and I don't necessarily, it's not that it's a bad service, or it feels a little bit different to me, and I don't feel like it centers me to be ready to be receiving of that Spirit. And it's kind of much like a preacher when we have a bad sermon and we're just like, man, that's a horrible sermon. And then like everybody, when they come out to greet you, it's like, man, that moved me, man. They like touch you and it's like, man, like why? Like that's, okay.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
I'm glad you had that experience, and thanks for reminding me that God's bigger than I am. And, and I think that we have to open ourselves up, be vulnerable to open ourselves up to the experience of God, whether it may be in a familiar setting, whether it be at church, and we center ourselves and we just open ourselves up in a centering kind of prayer way. And we don't allow ourselves to be distracted by our cell phones or our calendars or what do we got to do today, but just truly come and worship and just open ourselves up to see what experience we may have. I notice that when I do that, when I fully do that, when I fully am, and I call it fully present, when I'm fully present, it's amazing to see how things happen. And I think far too often we don't do what it takes to prepare ourselves for worship. And that's something that I'm trying to instill in my congregation, is that, like, from 9:30 to 10 o'clock, man, I'm working to get in that zone. And it's kind of like, I've talked to people about this. It's kind of like the athlete who gets ready to compete. They've got their music on and they're doing their thing. And every now and then I need to do that. So people may see me around with my music on and me doing, whatever. But every now and then, I mean, a lot of times it's me just coming down and praying.
Right.
And I think it's amazing to see how when we center ourselves, that when we open ourselves up to the faith, what we can't see becomes seen.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it's the difference, when we do camp or mission or, those things that are specifically centered around where we can truly retreat and pour ourselves in. The question becomes, here I am. And then when we're home in a normal thing and life is all around us, it's where are you, God? And it's because we're looking for it in our day-to-day lives. We're looking for God in those day-to-day lives, like I said, trying to grab onto it rather than, like you said, letting God grab onto us. And I think it's the difference in that that question, how we present ourselves of, here I am, as opposed to where are you at? And instead of allowing ourselves just the openness and to be humble and just vulnerable. Vulnerability is a big thing, which I don't think we allow ourselves to do on worship on Sunday mornings as a whole, for a lot of reasons, whether it's just being distracted because life is all around us, or just not wanting to be in that space. As a people, I don't think we like being vulnerable.
I mean, and maybe that's the thing for us to for the next week. We have to open ourselves up and maybe be willing to be vulnerable in doing that. Make note of that. See how God works on you and works through you, and see. And if it may mean, like, when you're getting ready for worship, as you're getting, I mean, I know, like, we're a I don't use the word blended. We're a worship service that utilizes a hymnal. So as you're getting your things, organized, maybe you get that organized quicker and stop and say, maybe recite the Psalm 46:10, be still and know that I'm God, and just pray.
Yeah.
And open yourself up to that meditation. And then as worship begins and you enter into that presence of worship, of allowing yourself to be grabbed by God, or you grabbing God, whatever you need, or maybe both. Maybe you need both. Open yourself up to that and allowing the Spirit to drive you. I think you'd be intrigued to see what happens and what God's really trying to reveal to you, because I think far too often you'll do that. And I've noticed lately when I'm reading something and I have, like, my sermon notes and I'm all like, spend a week on this thing, and
right.
And all of a sudden, like, maybe I'll read the scripture and this thing that just will come out to me, and, like, oh, I gotta talk about that.
I gotta talk about this, like, now, right?
Like, that's what God's grabbing me at now, and this needs to be proclaimed. And I think that's something that if we are vulnerable to that and opening up ourselves, then I think our congregants and people around us will want to be intrigued by that. And so maybe this week, just open yourself up and see how God, give God an opportunity to grab you, but then also open yourself up to give yourself the opportunity to grab God.
Yeah, I like that. Vulnerability is hard, so go out and do it. Just do it.
Just do it. We want to encourage you. We still got a few weeks left in our UMC memes competition.
Yes.
You can post those on our Facebook page. We've had several posts up. We know some of you are now in reflection mode of your annual conferences, and as you're reflecting, please feel free to create even more memes. And you may have one that you maybe you need to share just with us in a private message, and we won't post it because we know how sometimes vulnerability in regards to putting ourselves out there in those ways is not necessarily a good thing in these kind of settings. But we're going to put that on our Facebook page, and whoever gets the most likes, the top 3, we have different prizes for you, and we'll make sure we get those out to you. And I don't even know if we have 3. I think we have 4. So yeah. We may have a certificate for the 4th place person.
Participation trophy.
I know what we could do. They could get a Matt Franks signed picture.
There you go.
I wouldn't do that to anybody.
But headshots.
We're thankful for you, our listeners, and we encourage you to like us and share us throughout your social media circles of influence. But also go on our website or go to Apple, wherever you listen to this, and leave us a review. So that way we can, get our name out there. Because the more you do that, the more opportunities it gives other people to find out about us. And we are planning on, probably in the month of July, if we have any reviews, we will read those on air, just because we think they would be fun and funny. You know the drill. 5 stars, and then write anything you want to about us. Right. As long as you give us the 5 stars, you can write anything you want.
That's right.
And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
We hope you've enjoyed the conversations that we've had today on the Bearded Theologians Beardcast, and we'd encourage you to continue those conversations online at beardedtheologians.com or on our Facebook page. We also hope that you pick up a couple of coffee mugs to satisfy your coffee mug collection. Have a good day.